Nobody ever helps me into carriages, or over mud puddles, or gives me any best place. Ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. Ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. Ain't I a woman? I've borne 13 children and seen most of all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. Ain't I a woman? Sojourner Truth, 1851, Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio. The history of black motherhood in the United States has been marked by separation. From the time of slavery, the American black woman has been viewed through the lens of the labor she can provide others. Her role as wife and mother minimalized by the expectations of her work outside the home. The legacy of these ideas formed during the infancy of this nation is still felt, even today, as black women experience motherhood differently than their white counterparts, even in the first few hours after giving birth. Subjected to tropes such as the mammy, who in almost comical irony is characterized as the ultimate caretaker for white children, while simultaneously being neglectful to her own. Black women have for centuries seen their motherhood and their mothering called into question. The modern incarnation of the quote-unquote welfare queen characterizes the black mother as a dishonest materialist who only has children in order to game the system for more money. The lasting impact of such inaccuracies has been devastating. During slavery, black women were called upon to be wet nurses to the children of their white owners, often separated from their own children, sometimes permanently, just after giving birth. This practice continued even with emancipation, as many families, especially in the South, continued to employ black women in domestic capacities. In the first decades of the 20th century, as economic opportunity began to expand for black men, many black women were for the first time in a position to make the choice to stay home and care for their own children. The dwindling supply of domestic labor didn't sit well with many employers, and laws were passed in many places requiring black women to work, even if they had other means of support. A 1918 article from Greensboro, South Carolina, is a prime example of one such ordinance. It read in entirety: Negro women to be put to work. Regardless of whether they want to or have to, able-bodied Negro women in Greenville who are not regularly employed are to be put to work, put in jail, or fined heavily. At its special meeting yesterday afternoon, City Council discussed the situation with regard to this class of loafers at some length, and it seemed that all members of the council were agreed that steps should be taken to compel them to engage in some useful occupation. It was decided that an ordinance similar to the one now in force requiring all able-bodied men to work at least 5 days a week should be passed with regard to these women. Such an ordinance will be prepared and voted on at the next regular meeting of the council. A number of complaints have come to members of the council of Negro women who are not at work and who refuse employment when it's offered to them. The result being that it is exceedingly difficult for families who need cooks and laundresses to get them. Wives of colored soldiers getting a monthly allowance from the government have a number of them declined to work on the ground that they can get along without working, according to reports. Others have flatly refused jobs without giving any reason whatever, while still others pretend that they are employed, when, as a matter of fact, they derive a living from illegitimate means. The proposed ordinance will require them all to carry a labor identification card, showing that they are regularly and usefully employed. And the labor inspectors and police will be charged with the duty of rigidly enforcing the law. To make this abundantly clear, in the 20th century, there were Black women whose husbands were gainfully employed, some even by the U.S. military, who were told that by law they could not stay home with their families because someone needed a maid. The same 20th century in which most adults alive today were born. This assault on Black motherhood would continue. The 1940s saw a rise in the more widespread use of baby formula, and companies were quick to market their product to Black families. The combination of negative historical associations with being wet nurses and the reality of many Black women having to return to work very soon after giving birth made Black women prime targets for these advertising campaigns. By the 1950s, organizations such as La Leche League were formed. Their messages and campaigns were largely designed to encourage white women to breastfeed, while once again marginalizing Black motherhood. Images of white women breastfeeding their children began to be normalized, while one would only find an image of a woman of color doing so in the pages of National Geographic or the like. The Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also known as WIC, was launched in 1974. Women participating in these programs were more often than not encouraged to use formula, and to this day, Black women remain overrepresented in its participants. Historical wealth and wage gaps between races and genders leave Black women on average in the lowest income brackets. They are employed at a higher rate than any other group in the service industry, working jobs that often offer no maternity leave and almost certainly no accommodation for nursing mothers. A 2016 study found that Black mothers were 9 times as likely to be given formula than white mothers during their postpartum hospital stays. Other studies highlighted implicit bias on the part of lactation consultants who reported spending less time with Black mothers based on the false belief that they would, quote, not breastfeed anyways. Centuries of structural racism, societal norms, and implicit bias have led to the grim reality that as a group, Black babies have the highest infant mortality rate in the United States, with preterm birth also being a determining factor in the disparity of these rates. The survival of preterm infants is exponentially increased when they are given human milk and also time and contact with their parents. Yet, even today, having the opportunity to offer this care to their own children is still not possible for many Black mothers. It's high time we examine the root causes of such disparities and do the collective work of learning from the mistakes of the past in order to shape a better future for Black mothers and their children.